Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 11th Contra Costa Transportation Authority meeting. I am going to call the meeting to order and ask you all to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And for anyone who's listening out there in the ether, I am Julie Pierce, the chair of the Transportation Authority. The first item on our agenda this evening is public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to comment on anything not on tonight's agenda? Seeing no one come forward, we will close the public comment period and go to the approval of the minutes.
Move approval.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Next item is the consent calendar, and I understand, Newell, you had a comment on one item?
Yeah, it's just a comment, and it's really just to, we see all these wonderful reports in here, and yes, we do read them all. I just want to compliment, I don't know if he's in the audience, Pishan wrote, it's one of those reports that just reads really well. And, sometimes you go, wow, these take hours and hours for all the reports in here. I just thought the way it was written, it communicated well. I just want to say thanks.
Thank you very much. Hisham does a wonderful job for us. All of our staff are amazing.
2B2.
2B2. Okay. So
I'll move the consent calendar.
Motion by Tatson, second by Arnerich. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Durant. We are moving on to our major discussion items, and the first one is the development of the Transportation Sales Tax Transportation Expenditure Plan. And I believe, Ross, you are going to take this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair Pierce and Commissioners. Good evening. Ross Chittenden, Chief Deputy Executive Director for CCTA, and I'll be presenting this item. This is an informational item, but I have a lot of material that I do want to cover as part of my report. The item, as it's presented to you, is our monthly item to provide the approved minutes from the most recent Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee meetings, and that's what's in your packet. But I would like to take this time as an opportunity to really update you on a broader sense on where we are in the process and some of the things that will be happening over the next couple of months and into 2016. To set up the discussion, I would like to just remind you and review our timeline that we're working on for the development of a transportation expenditure plan. Staff and our consultant team are continuing to work with stakeholders and the public to solicit input into the process. We've been working. The plan is that we seek this input, and that again, our staff and our consultants will look at everything that's been received. And again, the three main input sources that we're using are the regional transportation planning committees submitted their proposals back in August. We're working to try to get a proposal from the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee. We're working with the general public through a number of means, polling that you heard about last month, as well as a number of items that Lindsay's working on, online tool, our upcoming telephone town halls and so forth, and then working with other stakeholders, PMA, Board of Supervisors, and other thought leaders throughout the county. Staff will ask the authority to release an initial draft at your meeting in November. So that's really what I want to focus on, what's happening between now and then. Once we release that draft in November, we'll again be circulating that and again ask for input from those same folks, the RTPCs, the EPAC, the public, and others. What's important about keeping this November deadline is that concurrent with that input for that initial draft, Martin and his team will be including that draft transportation expenditure plan as an option for analysis in the countywide transportation plan process. So we need to continue working on that, and Martin will be discussing that in the next agenda item. In January, staff and consultant team will come back with a second draft transportation expenditure plan using input and comments that we've received on the initial draft and whatever information we can get out of the analysis that'll be in the draft EIR. Again, Martin, at the same meeting in January, will release the draft EIR for comment. Between January and May, we will be refining that plan. And again, that would be with EIR information, the performance analysis out of that, as well as input from the stakeholders. It's during that time that we really want to work to get the conceptual support from the cities and the county. Again, to get this to the ballot, we need a majority of the cities. We really want to have all the cities behind it, and then the Board of Supervisors make the final decision to put it on the ballot. That all would wrap up in about May of 2016. So we're into a kind of a final 8-month or so, or I guess we're down to about 6 months, a 6-month stretch to where we need to have a plan that would then be circulated with the cities for formal approval. So we really have about a 6-month timeline. With respect to the staff report itself, if you've had a chance to read the EPAC meeting minutes for the September 14th and the 28th meeting, you'll see that we've had a lot of great discussion, but we're not yet to the point where we have consensus where we can have asked that group to bring forward a complete plan for your decision. And we're just, frankly, between staff and our consultants, we're seeing that we're probably not on track to do that. We again met in October 12th and had much of the same, where we had a lot of great discussion. We're just not, we haven't been able to form any kind of consensus. Not sure what's causing that. We have a very large group. I think we have probably a lot of folks who haven't been through this kind of a process before, so it's somewhat new to them. There's certainly been some comment about our overall approach and our facilitation approach. So for whatever reason, we're just not yet to the point of having consensus to get you the kind of detailed information that you need when you would consider releasing a draft in November. So staff and the consultants, we've decided we need to jumpstart the process, is a term we're using, and make a little shift to our approach. So we've made a decision that on or about November 4th, we intend to release a draft TEP that would initially go to the EPAC, but ultimately would be circulated with the entire public. And we think that by putting details in front of the group, we'll give them something to react to instead of working off a blank piece of paper. So that's really the fundamental shift that we're doing here, is to put something out, give people yes or no votes, the way to comment, and make adjustments, and hopefully that gets us moving along in the process. The initial draft TEP will include sections for we're calling expenditure plan allocation, so that would be the named projects and programs that would be funded with detailed descriptions and funding amount. Potential revisions to growth management program and urban limit line, that's something that's currently in the Measure J and up for discussion. Summaries of Contra Costa Transportation for Livable Communities program, again, something that's already in Measure J, with the potential additional sections related to complete streets, regional advanced mitigation, and other key investment decisions that we'd want to think about, and certainly things that we're hearing from a broad group of stakeholders. There'd be a section in there for governing structure, and then finally implementing guidelines. So this is something that's similar to what many of the other counties that have passed measures and over the last few years have done, and puts together a complete package that we think really, again, is a good starting point to get specific comments on a proposal. It's important to stress that what we were going to bring to you in November is not necessarily, and we really don't expect it's going to be an EPAC recommendation. We just don't have that yet. So we'll be able to bring this draft to you with comments that we'll receive at the EPAC's November 9th meeting. We'll ask them to do initial comments November 9th, ask you to release the draft at our meeting in November 18th, I believe, and then start the circulation with RTPCs and others. The EPAC would get a chance to do more detailed review at a meeting scheduled on December 7th. So that's just a little bit update on the process over the next few months. I did want to also take the time to kind of daylight some of the things that we think you should expect to see in the draft as it come forward. I'm not going to get into the specifics about dollar amounts, et cetera, but want you to start hearing some of the thought that's starting to gel with the input that we've received so far. First comment I want to make is related to our two biggest asks. The cities and the county have asked for about 30% for return to source for local roads. BART's asked for about the same amount, 30% for to complement a program that they're moving forward with. Staff and the consultants are really seeing where it's going to be difficult to reach that level. So don't want to say where we're going to land right now, but getting up to that level is going to be a challenge with all the other needs that are in the county. We know that return to source is may end up being a contentious issue as we go through this. Certainly there's well-documented and very legitimate needs there. We need to keep working with the state to hope that sometime in the early part of a new measure that they can do some substantive funding package that helps us address our fix-it-first needs. BART has been asking for about $735 million to fund new cars that would augment their fleet. So again, they're replacing their fleet. Replacing the fleet is fully funded. We need to work with BART to augment cars, and we need to find a way to find a substantial amount of money to do that. Whether we can get to 735, that's probably not something that'll fit within the overall capacity that'll be in the program. We want to see a large amount of the funding to focus on multimodal solutions on our major commute corridors. So one of the first things we've learned in talking to a few people, we need to take the interstate out of describing these projects. So if we say Interstate 80 transit, that doesn't mean we're going to do improvements on Interstate 80. It's doing transit improvements along the West County corridor that is now anchored by BART and I-80 and so forth. So we really want to make sure that we're looking at full intermodal or multimodal solutions. So that'd be the Interstate 80 corridor, again, more than just the highway. On 680, we need to have a context-sensitive solution that uses technology and looks at all the assets that are along the corridor. Something that came up in a discussion with the Board of Supervisors yesterday is enhancing Iron Horse Trail. So we need to look at all assets on the corridor. We need to address the Central County and East County commutes. So we're working on some technology projects, the State Route 4 operational improvements, integrated corridor mobility projects, and we do need to do something with the 684 interchange. We have to put some substantial funding on that. And then there's a big need out with the East County corridors. We need to improve our connections with Alameda County and with San Joaquin County out in the East County, and a number of ideas on the table for that. The transit operators are very engaged in the process, and they're looking at ways to improve transit, and much of that is really to enhance service to BART. So we need to look at how we're strategic about this transit funding that's in the program so that we don't distract from any of the existing service, and we make sure the service that's added are really for the routes that are going to carry a lot of folks and hopefully result in the mode shift that we all hope for as we work through the process. Many of the existing programs are going to be augmented. They're just, like today when we did Measure J, we had to make some tough decisions, and not all the programs had the level of funding that they deserve. So we will augment the existing programs, and we expect that there'll be some new programs. One of the things that will likely be driving that is just the changes that have occurred over the last 11 years or so. Some of it is just the recognition of what we need to do with as a result of SB 375 and sustainable community strategies. Another good reason for somebody that likes to leverage money is there's just different funding pots out there that work better for some of the programs in the program than for some of the hard capital projects. So that's just a reality that serves multiple purposes. It fits the needs, and it may become a good pot to leverage some of the emerging funding sources. Some of the discussion or some of the policies that we need to be open to for consideration. Probably most of the discussions at the EPAC meeting, as well as some input we've received from public agencies, a little bit from the Board of Supervisors yesterday, really relates to policies and implementing guidelines that would be in a new measure. Most of those surround the relationship of transportation and land use, which I know is a sensitive subject, but we need to be open to some thoughtful revisions or tweaks, if you will, to some of our existing policies. First, much discussion about the growth management program and urban limit line. Lots of discussion for some needs to change. We just haven't necessarily, at least in my opinion, and certainly not an expert on the subject, I haven't quite heard yet what's broken, so we need to work to have that articulated, and maybe there are some small changes or some changes that we need to make sure we consider. I'm not sure how much of that you're going to see in an initial draft, but again, the idea of that draft is to get something on the table and get something concrete on paper that folks can react to. A lot of the discussion on open space has talked about benefits, both related to habitat and recreational uses, but also as a carbon banking source to help with environmental effects of greenhouse gas emissions. So some of the things I think it's likely to see to promote that would be a regional advanced mitigation program, also known as RAMP. And the concept here is that you look at your overall program, you work through, often now it's through modeling, but through a rigorous approach to determine what the effects are and the required mitigations up front, and you fund it up front. And the benefit in doing that is that you have more mitigation funds on the table, and you can be more strategic, get more results out of larger mitigation, habitat acquisition, et cetera, than what you would get if you go through project by project. Now, I'm working as part of a pilot team that's sponsored by MTC and the Nature Conservancy, and we have a lot of the regulatory and permitting agencies as part of that team. So we need to be assured that when we do this mitigation that we're getting this credit so that when it's time for permitting, we will actually get the permit. So it's a big win-win opportunity. A lot of folks yet that are not quite to the point where we have all the details worked out, but again, I think it's something we should be open to, particularly if we can prove that it's going to work. There's been much discussion on loss of agricultural land, and later on the agenda, I know Commissioner Tatson is going to have a discussion on some of the activities over at LAFCO, and maybe there's a way to bring these efforts together from some of the things we're hearing at the EPAC. And of course, the major driver for our long commutes and high traffic levels is just the overall jobs, housing, and balance. So we really need to continue to look at ways to fund and invest in priority development areas and other areas where we can have quality housing. Obviously, OBAG's doing that. We can find ways to leverage some of the OBAG dollars, and I don't know if it's opposite from OBAG. Sometimes I view OBAG as, it's oversimplification, of course, is let's put people where the jobs are and where access to jobs are. We also need to think about putting jobs where people are. So there's been some innovative suggestions about ways that, with Northern Waterfront and even some of the other tactics is how can we invest in real infrastructure that we know is going to bring jobs. So I don't know if it's an incentive program towards employment centers or industrial areas, but certainly we need to be open to that. Many of the other topics that have been discussed, and I'm sure we'll see in some facet or another, complete streets, either as an individual funding item or certainly some policies related to complete streets, possibly incentive funding for complete streets. Accessible services, mobility management, and as you know, Peter Engel on our staff is working diligently on that with transit agencies, and the county is very involved in a proposal on that. One that we talk about a lot and we haven't necessarily figured it out yet is how can we build into this some flexibility for the future? If we're talking a 25-year measure, I don't know if I want to guess 10 years out. If I guess 20 years out, 25 years out, if I think back 25 years and compare it to today and compare it with the rate of change, are there ways that we can tell the voters and get the trust and credibility of the voters that we're going to spend the money wisely, but leave some room so that we're not locked in and we miss opportunities with emerging technologies. So with that, I'm sure we'll have a very robust discussion in November. The only thing I think I can say definitively is that no one is likely to get everything they want. So we need to make sure we strive to have a balance that at least keeps all the stakeholders engaged as we work through this 6-month process. As a final comment, I'd just like to inform you that this change of direction or this course revision we've had here to present EPAC with a proposal to comment on versus continuing to try to work on a bottoms-up proposal has met with some concern. I wouldn't say criticism necessarily, but what are you guys doing? We've tried a number of things, and we're trying something else. We need to try something to keep on schedule. I just want to state for the record, this is not intended to diminish the importance of the EPAC. In fact, it's likely that this change, as well as some of the other comments we've heard, is that EPAC is likely to be involved if they'll stay with us longer. Again, we'll receive comments in November and December on this initial draft. In January, Martin and his team will produce the draft EIR and its analysis, and we've had a number of folks that say they want an opportunity to look at that and comment on that, maybe be able to sift some proposals out of that analysis. So we'll probably invite the EPAC to continue on longer. So with that, I'd like to end my report and entertain any questions.
Thank you, Ross. Before we get into questions or anything else, I want to say welcome back, Federal. We could not be more pleased to see you sitting there at RDS. We are very pleased. We've missed you deeply. So it's good to be seen, right? And for those who don't know, Federal has just come through a long ordeal and survived a pretty serious illness and surgery. So we are very glad to have you back. Okay, with that, I see a lot of new people who have come into the room during Ross's report, so I will mention to you that there are speaker cards, green speaker cards or white speaker cards back on the back table. And if you want to fill those out, bring those to Denise. Denise, raise your hand. Bring those to Denise, and we will get you into the queue for comments on the items as they come up during the evening. I actually have a speaker card already for this item. If there are any others, get them to Denise quickly. And we will go straight to Kenji Yamada from Bike Concord.
Chair Pierce, members of the Authority Board and staff, thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Kenji Yamada. I live and work in Concord, and I'm one of the organizers of Bike Concord, an organization of residents of Concord and Central Contra Costa with a few hundred members. We're here tonight with our partners from Bike Walnut Creek, Bike East Bay, and Greenbelt Alliance to ask you to dedicate at least 15% of Measure J reauthorization revenue for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. As you're aware, such infrastructure is seriously lacking in Contra Costa County so far. In some cases, this is only an inconvenience. In most cases, it's a physical danger. There is a safety need for this infrastructure, and that need will go unaddressed unless CCTA makes it a high funding priority. Getting lots of people to switch more trips from driving to bicycling or walking will reduce motor traffic congestion for those who need to drive or prefer to drive. More bicycling and walking will not only achieve the state and county's active transportation goals, but will also reduce the high maintenance costs of motor traffic infrastructure. It's good sense financially, it's good sense from the standpoint of health and quality of life, and it's the right thing to do. It will not happen with small marginal nods to the need for non-motor infrastructure. This investment will yield great returns if the amount is commensurate with its importance for health, safety, and quality of life. It's up to CCTA to make that investment. On May 14th this year, Bike Concord, together with Bike East Bay, hosted a celebration of Bike to Work Day on Salvio Street in Concord. We were delighted to have Supervisor Mitchoff among our speakers at that celebration, delivering an official proclamation from the Board of Supervisors in support of our mission to make bicycling and walking into central parts of our transportation system in Contra Costa. Remembering that proclamation, I would like to especially ask Supervisors Mitchoff and Glover to support residents who want healthy transportation in Contra Costa by advocating at least 15% of Measure J reauthorization revenue for pedestrian and bicycle projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenji. The next speaker is Claire Linder, to be followed by Kristen Tennyson.
Good evening. Thank you for the time to speak. My name is Claire Linder. I'm also a member of Bike Concord and a regular bike commuter. That bridge out there, purchased with the Measure J funds, is fantastic. I would like to see more of that. I would like to be able to commute more often in more places. And I would like to second my support for at least 15% of dedicated funding to active transportation needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And the next speaker is Kristen Tennyson, to be followed by Juan Pablo Galvan.
Hello, my name is Kristen Tennyson. I'm a resident of Walnut Creek, and I also work there. I love living and working in Walnut Creek because of the great East Bay Regional Park Trail system that I use to get to most of my destinations. I am a motorist, I am a pedestrian, and I am a bicyclist. And still at 9 months pregnant, bicycling is my favorite form of transportation. It's great for the environment. It's great for my health. I also have my 2-year-old behind me in a trailer when I commute to work in his school. I'm here to ask for 15% of Measure J2 funds to go to the bike and ped improvements. I feel like we're really stuck in a cycle here where there's so many people driving because it's not safe and convenient and enjoyable to do any other kind of mode share, such as bicycling or public transportation. So when it comes time to design our streets, they're designed for motorists. And then we don't get any more people biking and walking and using public transportation. So we're stuck in this cycle. And I think that by developing particularly bicycle infrastructure where a 9-month pregnant woman and her 2-year-old can safely bicycle and get to their destinations would be a good place to start so that everybody who wants to bike or walk to their destinations feels safe and comfortable to do so. So please consider 15% J2. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen, and your 2-year-old is adorable. Okay, Juan Pablo Galvan, to be followed by Joel Devilcourt.
Good evening. My name is Juan Pablo Galvan, and I'm the land use planner with Save Mount Diablo. We have been highly involved in the entire transportation expenditure plan development process throughout, and we look forward to continuing involvement in a constructive fashion that will lead to a sustainable multimodal expenditure plan that does not simply remove the single occupant vehicle as a choice for commuters, but rather provides alternatives to the single occupant vehicle for all residents of Contra Costa County to combat the negative impacts of climate change and to relieve the traffic congestion in this area, which many of us know is some of the worst in the United States, if not the world. We do not simply want such a plan, and it is not even that such a plan is desirable. It is absolutely necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. The next speaker is Joel Devilcourt, and then I have cards from Eric Owens, Sergio Huerta, Mike Garatti, and Adam. Adam, you put it down. I'm assuming you all want to speak on this item? Okay, very good. So we have, and I have two more. Okay, very good.
Good evening. Joel DeValcourt with Greenbelt Alliance, the EPAC member and a Contra Costa voter. Some papers are being circulated right now. I'm also here to bring, as a representative among many organizations who have been on the EPAC as well as others who are interested in this process, a community vision for Contra Costa, a new sales tax measure, and what we see as a vision that could guide our work as we move over the next year and then into the future for the next 30 years if we do in fact move forward with a sales tax measure. Contra Costa was actually really ahead of the game, and in the 1980s with Measure C and then with Measure J in 2004, Contra Costa's growth management program, as well as other provisions, were really ahead of every other county in the state. And right now we're in 2015. Things are very different from 11 years ago, and we have incredible amounts of congestion. We have historic ridership on BART. We have massive effects in the housing market that are impacting all parts of our region, and we have great pressure on our agricultural and natural land. So we have kind of a conglomeration of effects, and what this requires is a transformative type of sales tax measure that will really do what it needs to take the reins on all of those factors, and that's a great challenge. And we've seen that CCTA staff have done a really great job of trying to bring together the EPAC membership, which is very diverse and very large, and it's a challenge to have a conversation with that many people and that diversity of perspective. But what we're finding is, unfortunately, too much of the status quo moving at too slow a pace. And I concur with Ross that the public process needs improvement, that we need to stimulate that debate so that we can arrive at the kind of meaningful consensus that we can move forward for Contra Costa voters. So this document right here is 13 signatories from a wide variety of local and regional nonprofit organizations, as well as other stakeholders, including environmental groups, transportation, housing, social equity, faith leaders, civic leaders, and many others, including those that are in this room who are speaking in support of a variety of issues. So I want you to take careful consideration to read this. This is, like I said, many folks who are very active, both on the EPAC process as well as who are the people who can be on the ground finding the voters that will support something great for Contra Costa. So thank you very much for your time. I also look forward to more cross-fertilization between the EPAC and the CCTA board so we can all arrive at the right kind of funding measure. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel. The next speaker is Eric Owens, I think it is, and Sergio Huerta follows.
Hello, my name is Eric Owens. I moved to Concord about 3 years ago. I started riding a bicycle when I was 5 years old, and I lived in Livermore. And I used to ride my bike all over downtown and just really enjoy riding bikes. And so I moved to Concord about 3 years ago, and it's really great that there's all the trails here, but there's definitely lacking as well. I don't know. To me, it seems that Concord is really set up for cars. There's lots of places where there's sort of high speed limits and all the roads are closed off. And yeah, I love to ride bikes. I got an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old, but my wife is just deathly afraid of me riding around with my children just anywhere near major roads. And I just want to say, you know, I would like to see it safer for children and people just of all ages to be able to get on a bike and use it for transportation. So if it's Measure J at 15% or whatever it is, I just would hope that you would put the health and safety of the people that need to use roads. But, even on top of that, like I have options, I have cars, but you just drive around in Concord here and you see people that bikes are their main form of transportation. They are forced to do that, and it would be great to make the roads safer for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. The next speaker is Sergio Huerta, followed by Mike Garotti.
Hello, members of the Costa Transportation Authority. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm with Bike Concord and 13-year resident of Concord. Raised my kids here. Kids go to school locally. I just think what others have said about biking and making roads safe for everybody, I just want to piggyback on that and know that Measure J would provide some great funding opportunities, and 15% I don't think is unreasonable. I think it's as little as I know about it. About how the projects are laid out. I think bicycle pedestrian improvements to the roadways are very important. As others have mentioned, the roads are strictly for cars. It's very dangerous to ride a bicycle, much less walk and cross intersections through town, whether you're in Concord, Pleasant Hill, Walnut Creek. So looking at some of these arterial streets, connecting the communities, connecting people to transportation, whether it's mass transit or colleges or shopping centers, work centers, I think it all has to be looked at. And from a bicycle pedestrian perspective, I also drive, but also with children, I see that sorely lacking in the community. And I'm thinking of all Central Contra Costa and how we link, and just how the funding from Measure J would be awesome to see. And I think 15% is very reasonable to ask that bicycle improvements are done for transitioning streets, for complete street designs and existing designs that are out there. Everybody else or other cities are doing it within the Bay Area, and I think it's just the right time to do it. Besides what the state will be mandating for greenhouse gas reductions and just quality of life, sustainability, and other words that I've heard tonight, and I think you are all aware of. I mean, the time is now to really plan for and fund for changes to our roadways and in our community. So thank you again.
Thank you, Sergio. All right, and Mike Garotti, followed by Adam Foster. And again, try to keep your comments as brief as you can, unless you're adding something new to the discussion, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mike Garrity. I'm a resident of Pleasant Hill. I'm here to support increased funding for bike and pedestrian improvements. I've been commuting to Oakland and Alameda for at least 20 years. I go by BART, naturally, so I don't have to put my car on the road. And to get to BART, I ride my bike. So I live about a mile this way. And it's kind of interesting because I'm on roads for part of it, but then I find I'm going to be on a sidewalk, dodging people, telephone poles. I'm going to go through a parking lot, and then when I cross Geary Boulevard and Treat, there's no way to ride your bike on that street at all. So you have to get up on the sidewalk, and you're on a narrow sidewalk. It's not really designed for bikers and pedestrians. So the point is, the overall design isn't here to get people safely to BART, and that's, I think, part of what you people are here to do. So I would ask, and there's design work there, because obviously it's difficult. Geary's a difficult street. Where do you put a bike lane? I don't have the answer to that, but hopefully we could study it and we can figure out the best ways to get people to BART. Just a quick word about Oakland. I work in Oakland. I do some biking in Oakland. Huge number of improvements going on with biking there, and some, and Berkeley and San Francisco, but new ways of marking streets, new ways of separating vehicles from bicyclists. So I'd hope those are the kind of things that we could be thinking about out here.
Thank you very much, Mike. Next speaker is Adam Foster, followed by Kathy Cora.
Absolutely. This. Good evening. My name is Adam Foster. I'm a resident of unincorporated Walnut Creek. I am here speaking on behalf of my 2.5-year-old and 3-month-old daughter. I'm here to voice my support for designating more funds, at least 15%, for Complete Streets projects. I feel that diversification of our county's transportation investments would enhance the health, safety, and quality of life of our county's residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Next speaker is Kathy Cora, followed by Danny Milks.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to talk. I'm Kathy Cora. I'm 71. I bike. I run in Walnut Creek in Oakland, San Francisco. I even bike down Market Street in San Francisco, which is a totally different experience. It's much safer. So I'm asking you and supporting the 15% increase in for biking in this county. It's I do a lot of shopping trips, and I'm retired, so I do even more. But sometimes the transition to the sidewalks, the corners, and you know that Walnut Creek is getting impacted by the increase in traffic and shopping. So I'm really concerned about the future years. And I also teach biking to little children, so I would like to ensure their safety and be able to encourage them to bike to school. And that is a concern right now. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kathy. The next speaker is Danny Milks, followed by Aaron McHugh.
Hi, my name is Danny Milks, and this is my son, Brock. And we're residents of Walnut Creek. He gets to go bike to his school every day, and we love that. And I get to bike up to my bike commute up to BART every day, and it's mostly good, but there's a lot of ways it can be improved. And these small improvements can make a big difference in terms of the number of people who would bike instead of drive. And I think if we had the money to fund those facilities to encourage people to get out of their car and instead to bike or walk, then we'd see a lot more people like that we see here trying to get to their families or teaching kids to get to whatever it is, the grocery store, to the BART, to their school, to the playground, by other means of transportation. So I ask that you at least put aside 15% for bicycle and pedestrian, but realistically, I mean, we'd love to see 50% or something like that to make up for past. I mean, I know they got a lot of laughs, but that wasn't a joke in terms of considering how little funding has gone to bicycling and pedestrian safety. Then it's time that it be made up so that we can all be safe on our way to wherever we're going. So thank you.
Thank you, Danny. The next speaker is Aaron McHugh, followed by somebody who only put an email that looks like Addie Olvera. Okay, you didn't put your name on the top of the card. You only put the email on it. Okay, Aaron.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. In the interest of brevity, my name is Aaron McHugh from Concord, and we just want to reiterate what Kenji said, only louder, and at least 15% of funding towards bike and pedestrian. So
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. I believe this is an Addie. Okay, and followed by Smitty.
Hi, my name is Addie Olvera. I'm with Bike Concord, a resident of Concord for 3 years now with my son, partner, and 5-year-old daughter. We've started cycling recently and to encourage health, exercise, and to get out and to really get to know and feel part of the community. And many times it has felt unsafe and discouraging to get out and about town on cycle. And when you get sad or afraid of being out, you discourage families from getting out to exercise and being part of the community. So for me, I support a minimum of 15% of the funding to go for ped and bicycle improvements so that my family feels safe when we're out and about town, going to schools, trying to get on the trails, and trying to visit our neighboring cities to also connect with them and do a lot of the community activities that they do. So we're very interested as a family in having completed streets that allow safety for pedestrians and safety for cyclists. Because many times when I've had to ride the sidewalks with my family, it becomes scarier for the pedestrian to see this bike in a big old trail and not where to run because, we may crash. So we really would appreciate that direction of some funding of minimum 15% towards improvements in cycling, bicycling, and pedestrian. Thank you.
Thank you, Addie. What an adorable little boy. Good job. Okay, Smitty is the last card that I have. Oh, I got another one coming. Okay. Smitty to be followed by whoever just turned theirs in.
Okay. So I'm Smitty, and I'm with Bike Concord also. For the past 2 years, Bike Concord has done free bicycle repair at the Thursday evening farmers market in Concord. I like working on the bikes, but we also have a table where we have information to help people bike. We have pamphlets on the bike link lockers. We have maps and just anything on how to lock your bike. Any information we can pass on to people to help them get on their bikes and use them as transportation and enjoy using the facilities that we have presently to get around on their bicycles. But one of the clear messages that I get while I'm at the table talking to people, I hear a lot of, I would love to ride my bike around town. I love to ride my bike to the grocery store, take my kids to the store, to the schools and things like that. But I'm scared. I don't feel it's safe. I don't feel there's enough infrastructure. So I think the comments that I've received at that table really justifies a minimum of 15% funding to make it where you can get from point A to point B. I can get, well, make it to get from point A to point Z. I can get to B. I can't get to D, E, F, and Z. So we need the funding and we need the infrastructure because people want it. Also, my claim to fame here, it's on my cell phone, is I received the award from for Bike Concord from Supervisor Mitchoff for Bike to Work Day. So if you would like to see it, that's my 15 minutes claim to fame.
Thank you, Smitty. Our final speaker, at least the final card that I have, is Dave Campbell.
Dave Campbell, I'm Advocacy Director for Bike East Bay. We do advocacy work in Contra Costa, Alameda counties. And I want to give you a little more background on this Complete Streets 15% ask so you can understand that as we ask for that and have these discussions with the Measure J expenditure plan, we want to create streets that work for everybody. Streets like Treat Boulevard, streets like San Pablo Avenue, California Boulevard and Walnut Creek, North Main Street, McDonald Avenue, 23rd Avenue, San Pablo Avenue. These streets are all around the county, and it's not just about biking, and it's not just about walking. It's really not just about any one thing. It's making busy streets like Treat Boulevard out here work for everybody. So we can get buses timed with BART trains, we can get shuttles from park and ride lots onto freeways, and we can get people walking and biking to all of these facilities with the goal of giving people options. And we know that some people do want options. And we need to get those people the good options that they want, so that frees up the capacity for the people that do need to drive. And we call this Complete Streets. And so it's not a bike ped program. It's not a transit program. It's not a shuttle or a bus program. It's kind of this complete program that makes streets work for everybody. And it's super important. I think the voters are going to love it. It's going to make these priority development areas where we're trying to direct growth work much better. Particularly areas around BART stations like Richmond BART or Pleasant Hill BART, all of our big transit centers. But we've got a long ways to go. The initial numbers that we're seeing in the expenditure plan don't really show a strong Complete Streets program, and that's what we're looking for. So we've got a long way to go. We don't have much time to get there, so we've got to speed this process up. We've got to make it more efficient to get the expenditure plan advisory committee on board with a program that we can win in November and bring much needed transportation dollars to Contra Costa County. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That was the final card for this item, so I will bring it back to the authority members. Thank you all for speaking. I think we got a message there. I think there's a number that you put in there. I think I
That
heard
District
that loud
4
and clear.
residents are very active and involved.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. All right. Tom.
Thank you. You know, I appreciate all of the bicycle and complete streets advocates, and the fact that you're making yourself heard. I just want to say I'm proud to say that that's the direction that we've weighted our wish list in West County. So if you don't feel safe in Concord, you can always come over to West County and use our bicycle trails and our complete streets, and we would welcome you there. One other thing I want to say is that as the economy continues to grow, and I watch traffic grow, and I'm sure all of you see this, and this is not scientific, it's just watching the way things happen. The freeways and the arterials fill up earlier and early in the morning. You can go out at 5 o'clock in the morning now, on Interstate 80 or I-580 or, the Bay Bridge, the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, and traffic is just crawling at all those places. And people they keep trying to go earlier and earlier to beat the rush, and they can't do it. And I think the point is that until we align land use planning and transportation planning and treat them as one subject, we're never going to beat this. And even the idea of complete streets and bicycles and that kind of thing, that's something that's absolutely essential for relatively short commutes. But the way people commute in the Bay Area, they drive for miles and miles and miles. And until you can get that person who's working in Marin to live in Marin, or that person who, people live closer to where they work, I just don't think we're ever going to solve this problem. I don't think there's any way we can build ourselves out of it. We can't do it with transit. We can't do it with complete streets. We can't do it with bike paths. We can't do it with anything. It's just gonna get worse. And I don't know how you do it. Maybe you got to take some of this money. I know we can't do it, but you take some of this money and you pay people a bonus to live. The closer you work, the more money you get back from. The closer you live to where you work, the more money you get back from the government and a tax credit or something like that. But somehow we got to find a way to bring these two things together into one big plan.
Thank you, Tom. Other comments? Newell.
Well, first of all, a couple of things. I do appreciate, as everybody else, hearing from our folks, and obviously some of you are on the committee. But I just want to go back to what Ross said before making some general comments, that I think, just the observations at EPAC, I think we had to put something out there, because you can always say, I like this and I don't like that. And that gets a conversation going. So I wouldn't criticize that. I'm a little nervous because I didn't like certain things on there, but I'm just one voice as well. But I think, it's just like hearing, being asked to put up $350 million for bike and ped, mobility, it's a lot of money. There are a lot of competing interests. And I think I'm really proud that, in our last two measures, we have tried to deal with everything. We also have to make a decision, ultimately, what's going to be most impactful? Do we make everybody happy and accomplish nothing? Or do we do something to make something really work? And the reality is we know pavement is not a solution. We can't put more pavement down. We don't have any more width. We can't do that. But the technologies that are there, and you probably all heard on the news today. Today was the day that Marty McFly said XYZ is going to happen in the future. They got it completely wrong. Star Trek, though, was almost right in everything they've done. So I'm hoping for beam me over, Scotty, so I don't have to keep driving here. But I think it's good to hear from everybody. But I think everybody has to recognize that ultimately we're going to have to make a decision that deals with the greater good, that is also forward-thinking. And in transportation, Martin Engelman and myself were listening to Will Kempton, head of the CTC. And, the reality is, here's the statistic, 75% of the people use a car right now. In the future, 30 years from now, it'll be 65%. So the reality of how we are, in order to change this, we're going to have to be forward-thinking, and we're going to have to look at real technologies, in the autonomous car, all of those things. And I think one of the exciting things is you see what Alex Mayron at Sunset Development is doing is actually buying some cars, putting a test in to see how that it's going to run an autonomous vehicle, where I can take my app and say, I need to go see so-and-so at Chevron, and it's going to be here in 5 minutes, and I push the button and it stops for me. And I know exactly what corner it's going to do. I think it's all of those things, and those are all electric. Those are silent, they're quiet, they're good for the environment. But ultimately, we've got, and I know how to juggle, by the way. I can juggle all the hard ways to do that. But I can juggle 3 items, and the minute I get to 5 or 10 or 15, it's harder to do. And the point I'm making is that I think we need to hear from everybody, but we also need to think about the future in a different way. And thinking that we're going to keep riding bicycles or we're going to be doing things differently. So I think we have to fix what we have. When you look at the Iron Horse Trail as one of the best assets we have, as one of the women mentioned, our problem is you ride a bike, then you got to get off, cross a 8-lane arterial road to get back on your bike and do that. I think we have to be cautious. Our voters want to see quantifiable things. No way, and we know this from past experience, we know from all the other measures throughout the state, people don't want anything as general. It's got to be, that's going to be done, this is specific. And when it comes to telling a city we don't have the authority, we could put $2 billion in bike and ped, and we'll build 0. We don't have the authority to do that because it takes me and Danville and my council for us to say that's our mandate, we're going to do that. So the levels and the layers that we have to go through, I just hope we're forward thinking. And just like we think about cars, that, well, we're not going to be using cars, I don't think we're going to be doing bike and ped in the same way that we think in the future. I think it's going to be different. So I hope that we are innovative, and with a $2.3 billion limit, you know what? We're not going to buy a whole lot. And what I'd hate to see is, and this will be kind of committed for the next 30 years. So your children that were here tonight will not get any additional funds for 30 years under our current tax system. This will max us out. We want to use those dollars really wisely, that we do the things we need. We need to be able to have jobs. And it'd be great if I can bike. I don't bike to work, bad knees, but if I could, I can't do it all the time. So I'm going to have to use a car. We have to be able to balance those things to make sure that we take care of the primary thing, was making sure that commerce and all of us can get to where we need to go to accomplish the things so that we can live in these wonderful communities and earn the money so we can pay these taxes. So, I appreciate that. I know we're going to have other groups who are going to come to us, and we welcome all of that. And personally, I welcome that. But I'm really looking for some innovative ideas of how we can do it differently.
As Ross said at the beginning of his introduction here, this is an information item to talk about the process, and just to give us a heads up that, and I'm assuming this is for the November 4th PC meeting that we're going to have this list?
No, November 4th is the approximate mail-out date for the November 9th EPAC meeting.
Okay.
So that it'll be directed to EPAC, but it's public. EPAC is an advisory committee to you, so it goes through our public channels. Everyone will see it at the same time.
So the intent is that we're putting up kind of a straw man plan so that everybody can take shots at it and tell us what they like and they don't like, and whether we've got the balance right, and some of those things. And that's important because we've got to kickstart this conversation and start having some real dialogue about what's going on. So any more comments over here? David.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me echo Newell's comments and won't repeat any of them in the interest of time. From a process standpoint, I have a couple of concerns that just come out of the report that we have. I think the fact that EPAC has not gotten to a place where it's seemingly at consensus is not a particular surprise, given the variety of interests that are represented there. it is, as Ross said, a large, diverse group. What troubles me a little bit is I don't think we have a sense, the minutes don't really give a sense of what it is that's sort of standing in the way of having the ball move further down the field, if you will. And I think I'd like to have a better sense of what are the sticking points toward, as part of that group trying to achieve consensus. So that's the first of the issues that I'm concerned about. The second one is the timeline that's been mapped out. It feels a little too rushed to me to have EPAC get the packet on November 4th, have a conversation on November 9, have it come to the authority before EPAC's discussions are really finished, and then have it go back to EPAC for a follow-up conversation on December 7th. To me, from a process standpoint, that just feels all wrong. I think we've asked EPAC, which again is a very large and diverse group, to work this before it comes back to us. And so I don't get how that's going to work. That's just sort of a fundamental concern that I have. With half of their work being done, having got a packet in a plan 5 days, or even a straw man, right, 5 days before the meeting. Unless that's going to be a 30-hour meeting, I don't get it. So help me understand what the thinking is behind that sort of process, and what thoughts really been given into if there's a different set of alternatives for how we can keep the overarching timeline, because I know that's important. And as you probably remember, we don't yet have a consensus that we're actually going to a ballot measure. I'd hate to be rushing and doing this in a sort of kittywampus way that doesn't get us to a place where we can actually make a sound determination with the right sets of input from people before we get there. So just sort of conceptually, Ross, I don't want to put you on the hot seat, but I actually do.
That's all right.
So try to make sense of that collection of
Sure.
concerns and help me understand things.
Well, I'll go backward from your comments, because the overarching timeline, we have a very definitive date where we need to wrap this up and make a decision if we're going to the ballot, and that's in July. And to get there, we have to work through the cities and counties, so that's even on an expedited process. So we really need to come to consensus among this body, and this body will make the ultimate decision about what's in the plan and when we go forward. And we need to get there by about May, and that's still even rushing from May to July to go out to 19 cities and the county. So we're really working this backwards. There are a number of things, kind of to add to your comments. There's another thing that's concurrent with this, which is really the analysis of the countywide transportation plan options. So we're doing several things in parallel. This is maybe more of a personal observation for me, trying to be optimistic about it. I was hoping that in the November draft, we'd have consensus from the different groups that are getting us input. Of course, the public's going to say whatever, they'll have their opinions. We're not asking them for consensus. We're just asking their opinion. We would have that, and we'd be able to formulate that to where it's maybe 85% what we think is the final, work through around in January and have it at 95% final, and then we fine-tune it. I think the most fundamental change we need to look forward to, at least the way I was looking at it through with what we're attempting to do here, is we need to be more flexible in that January to May timeline. That January is probably not a 95% good. It's probably, maybe that's back to the 85% good. So we're going to really have to sharpen our ears. I don't know if that made up a saying there, but we need to make sure that we're listening in that post-January period, because that's really where the full picture will come together. So I don't know that it's really that fundamental of a change from what we've done. It would have been great to have this bottoms-up proposal with consensus from EPAC. Why we're not there, I don't think the sticky point is that we have a divergence of opinion. I don't think the sticky point is that we don't have the right people around the table. If anything, I think we should take credit for that, as we just misread how to work with the group. Our overall approach of assuming folks had more experience in doing these kinds of things was probably off. We're clearly not using an appropriate facilitation style for the group. I think one of the speakers said we're interjecting opinion where we should really be just gathering information. So I'll take credit for that. We misjudged the approach that worked best for this group. But I think that's the biggest thing, and that's going to be the hardest part of it, is that, I was hoping we'd have a pretty solid proposal by January, that we could be out and then really work that January to May period with, do we have enough to get the cities on board and the Board of Supervisors? We're just going to have a more fluid proposal, and that's just going to take a lot more work with all of us to keep that fine tuning and find a point where we say, okay, now we know what it is. Instead of January, that might not be until March, and then start that fine tuning. So I hear you and have the same concerns. I think we just need to be open to more changes after January than what I was anticipating.
I would just add on to that. I think the point that needs to really be emphasized in my talking with several of the stakeholders over the last few weeks is that many of them really want to see, as we do, that environmental analysis of the CTP and of the alternatives that we're going to be looking at, because whatever we throw up there as we try to get close in November is just going to be one of the alternatives. There will be the no build, there will be the ABC that's in the countywide transportation plan. I think Martin told me there are 6, maybe 7. He'll tell us that in a minute when we get to his item. But there will be several alternatives that will be analyzed, and a lot of the projects will be more thoroughly analyzed as well. And so we'll find out where the bang for the buck really is in some of that analysis, and then we'll have to put all that together and figure out what makes the best package that best balances the things that we want to do to actually make something happen with these dollars. So I don't think that we're going to be able to avoid a little of this, I'll call it squishiness for right now, because we're still thinking about all the options. And frankly, when we did the measure 11, 12 years ago, we didn't have as many requirements on us as we do today.
Right. Yep.
We have a whole lot more that we have to analyze according to law, and there's a lot more that has to go into it. And so until we have some of those answers back in January, we can't really do the fine tuning, because we really need all of that before we can get there. So while it feels a little less determined at this point, I think we're actually on a really good track. We're hearing well from our stakeholders. They're giving us lots of feedback. There are lots of competing interests from the diverse areas of our county and the many, many different people who are commenting. And the other thing is, 11, 12 years ago, we didn't have the diversity of stakeholders we have today, or the activeness. We had several stakeholders who were very, very active, but they weren't as cohesive a group in some ways, and they weren't as diverse. And so we're getting a lot more comments now, and that's a good thing, because our public is talking to us, and they all want to be part of the process, and I think that's wonderful. So we're just not going to land in a comfortable place until we land there, and we just got to keep pushing forward. But I think this whole idea of putting out a plan to talk around is going to help us at least get started, and that gets us started on the environmental process to do the analysis of all these different options. So then we can actually get some meat on the bones and figure out what makes it work. So other comments? Kevin, did you have anything? Okay, Don? Federal, any comments? Karen, Janet?
The comment I have is, hello, Bike Concord. I didn't really know how strong a group you were, and it's nice to hear you here. The thing I kind of got out of tonight was this sounds what I was hearing tonight was what I would call what I would say people would loosely call bicycle input, but it sounds just like the input I hear in my city all the time, and we don't call it bicycle comment. Right now, we're calling it active transport. We're doing what we call an active transportation plan, which is a plan that includes a variety of things, one of which is bicycles. And it just seems very much in touch with what's going on at my local jurisdiction, and I think in Tom's too, if I might. Tom, is that correct? This is same things going on in your city. And it's a whole new way of looking at things. There's all kinds of ways that you can see that expressed. It's people don't necessarily go anywhere to go to work these days. When I go precinct walking during the week, during the day, a lot of people are home. It's because that's where they work. And so the people who do that don't need a road to get anywhere because they aren't going anywhere. What they need, to get to work, I should say, they need a road to get maybe somewhere else, but they don't need one to get to work. And it's just a whole different definition of what it is we're doing and how it is we're doing it. And I think it's addressing the variety of ways in which we travel. I don't bike, I don't drive, I don't walk, but I manage to get there. And I use, pathways, I use transit. And sometimes actually I do go in a car, but there are people, all different people get around different ways. And I think I'm kind of happy this was the first really large group we had come before us, because it, I think, points out that we all get there in a different way, and that we need to have an expenditure plan that accommodates that. That we can all, you may do it one way, I may do it another way. It doesn't mean, that you're going to have to do it my way or that I'm going to have to do it your way. We just need to learn to work together. But anyway, there's another thing I thought I remembered from having been around when we did the last expenditure plan, and that is that it didn't feel to me like we had our act together with that plan way ahead of time either. We were struggling to get everything done in time to put it on the ballot, is what I remember. I remember being up till at a meeting across the way till 2 in the morning.
After 1 a.m. Yep.
To 1 a.m. Yeah.
That's when the deal got cut, right, Federal?
Yeah. Yes. Because we were not. This is like a luxury, Ross. Are you hearing this? This is a luxury to. It's a different year. Last time it wasn't any different year. I don't remember for sure what month it was. I could swear it was June or July.
No, it wasn't quite that late,
Wasn't
because we
quite
still
that-
had to shop it to the cities. But
Yes, I
you're right,
remember
we're on
that.
about the same track.
Right, yeah. So we're actually, I don't think we should complain to ourselves that we're doing such a terrible job just yet, because I think it's relative to last time, it's actually quite early. One thing I did hear tonight, the comments that were made were actually, I think, positive comments. The comments all said, this is what we want, and the ask was, to me, what I heard, 15% for bikes or bikes and related things, such as pedestrian and so forth. So that's a positive, to me, that's a positive statement. So if another group comes along like the cities and say, we want return to source and a certain percent of that, that's a positive comment also. And if all the positive comments add up to 100%, then that's where we get to work. But right now, where they're not saying, I don't want this, I don't want that, they're saying what they want. And I think that's to
We've
be
had a lot of
candid.
positive comments that add up to about 200%.
Exactly.
So we will have
Yeah.
we will have we'll have to.
We'll have our work cut out
We'll
for
have
us,
our work
yes.
cut out for us. But I think we have, what I'm hearing tonight is the group that's here tonight wants to be part of the solution. And I think that's super, and I'm happy to have them here.
Thank you, Janet. Any other comments over here? No? Okay. David?
Yeah, I just want to
Wrap it
clarify.
up.
I just want to clarify a couple things. First of all, I don't want the comments that I made to be mistaken for being negative. I had a concern that I expressed. I appreciate the hard work both of EPAC and our staff and the people who've come forward to express their views about it. I also appreciate, Ross, your accountability in taking ownership of the fact that the process hasn't gone the way you had wanted, and that I think collectively we had wanted. And so my question wasn't about being negative. It was about pushing to ensure that the process that we're working with is actually not just a teeny bit better than the one from 12 years ago, because a bunch of us lived through that nonsense. And we got it passed. But it would also be a lot better, and I'm not blaming anybody. I'm literally just saying it would be better to not go through that again. We should, as good human beings, learn from the past and move forward in a way that demonstrates the progress of our thinking and learning capacity. So again, I just want to be clear about it. My comments were not designed to be negative or to throw, stones at Ross or EPAC. It was literally about me asking the question: are we putting ourselves in an awkward position with the structure and the order and the process that was laid out? What I heard articulated is maybe a little bit, but it's really sort of inevitable, and they're doing the best they can, and that was a fine answer, and I appreciated the accountability. So keep up the good work and the hard work, and please take the concern expressed in the spirit intended.
All right, very good. Thank you, Ross. And we will look forward to subsequent feedback. We are now into our regular agenda items, and the first one there is we are honored with the presence of our colleague, Don Tatson, who also serves on the LAFCO board, and he is going to give us a presentation on some activity that they are undertaking where we might be able to collaborate together for the betterment of our county. What a novel concept, having two public agencies work together. I love it. Don, take it away.
Is your mic on?
Yes, okay, it should be on now. So it's a pleasure to be here representing LAFCO. I do want to say at the beginning that this item is a victim of agenda inflation. LAFCO does not have a draft agricultural and open space policy for which you to comment on. We haven't even decided whether we're going to have an ag and open space policy. What I'm really here tonight is to say we're looking at it and to get feedback from the authority about how you would like to work with us if we decide to proceed. And we benefit from the fact that our agencies have intertwining membership. Commissioner Glover is also a member of LAFCO, and we were honored to have him at our last meeting last Wednesday. So he's heard this presentation before, which is maybe why he stepped out. And Supervisor Anderson is also an alternate for the supervisors to LAFCO, and Commissioner Butt is an alternate from the Mayor's Conference to LAFCO, and I'm one of the two. So there's a lot of people who sit on both agencies, and so it's I think, likely that what we do is going to be done with thoughts about what the other agency is doing. For those of you who aren't on LAFCO, just a little brief synopsis of LAFCO's role. And the main thing that we do that affects cities and special districts is that we approve annexations, and we also approve spheres of influence, which in LAFCO terminology are sort of the areas a jurisdiction thinks it might need to annex in the next 10 years. We are governed by state law, and by state law, the mission of LAFCO is to conserve agricultural and open space while permitting orderly development. And so part of that then comes to encouraging development within spheres of influence and annexed areas before jurisdictions annex more property. In the work we've done so far, we've looked at 11 different policies that LAFCOs around the state have. And in summary, they fall into 4 categories, but they're all different, and there's no cookie-cutter approach. The first is a bunch of LAFCOs just don't have a policy at all on ag and open space, and they rely on the state legislation called the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Law to guide them. Contra Costa is currently in that position. There are several counties that have what I'd call a minimal policy. They take the words in the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Law and they rewrite them in their own words, and it runs about a page. There are some LAFCOs that really focus on the application process. And what they do is they require an applicant for either a sphere change or an annexation of agricultural and open space land to demonstrate that this proposal is clearly in support of the underlying legislation, which means that they have to show that they have no real opportunities to expand or to develop within their existing boundaries, that they have analyzed the impact of their proposal, if it includes annexing agricultural and open space land, on the remaining land, and they provide a report on what the economic impact of that would be on the agricultural business in that area. So, for example, you'll see in some slides coming up that we've used up a lot of our prime agricultural land for development, and as a result, for example, our agricultural industry is now about $100 million. There are other counties in the state where the agricultural industry is worth well over $1 billion. One of the features of that in terms of the viability of ag land is that there is no tractor dealer in Contra Costa County. No tractor dealer. You know, and if you're in agriculture, tractors are useful. Yeah. So, there you go. Right. And then the fourth category I want to touch on are LAFCOs essentially that have prescribed conditions in their policies to say that if we allow you to annex agricultural and open space land, then, for example, we will say that you have to include an agricultural buffer between what you annex and where the agriculture starts. That the people who live or work in the newly annexed land where there's agricultural next to them have to understand that there's a right to farm agreement for the surrounding agricultural land. And in a number of counties where if you annex an acre of agricultural land, you have to preserve that amount or somewhat more agricultural land somewhere else in the county. So these are essentially the 4 flavors. Where we are is we've looked at the other policies. We've had a workshop that 40 or 50 people attended. That was useful for us to get a number of perspectives about agriculture. And we're now doing outreach. So we've made this presentation to the public managers, the planning directors, the Special District Association, the planning committee for the authority, and tonight the authority. So recognizing that the real purpose is just to get some feedback on method, I just wanted to share a few maps with you. So if you were in Contra Costa a couple of hundred years ago, there's a lot of ag land. Essentially, it's all this area in that sort of greenish color. And the main industry in Contra Costa at that time was agriculture, and that's where the development happened. So if you look at the next map, the brown is now where the development has occurred. And not surprisingly, as in other counties across the state, it's in prime ag land. But we still have a fair amount of ag land left, primarily in the eastern Contra Costa, but not exclusively. So we look now about where jurisdictions are thinking about expanding, but we don't have any applications. This sort of shows areas that the county thinks might be under discussion for future development. And I will say at the beginning that each of these areas has its own story. The purpose of tonight's discussion is not to get into the stories on each area, but just to say there are a number of them out there. They range from areas that are inside the sphere of influence but outside the urban limit line and urban growth boundaries, areas that are outside the sphere but inside the urban limit line, areas that are inside the sphere, outside, et cetera, and some that are outside of both. And going back to those policies, none of the counties has a policy that prevents annexation of agricultural and open space land. That's not the intent. But if you look now at these areas and then look at what kind of land they're on, by and large, but not exclusively, they're on land that is important agricultural land in some way. So that's why there's some interest to us that if part of our goal is to preserve agricultural and open space land, and a lot of the areas that jurisdictions may be looking at for more development is on that land, what do we do, if anything? In another map, these are what cities have identified as their planning areas. That doesn't mean this is an area they plan to annex. It may simply be an area that they want to have influence on what does occur there. In some cases, some jurisdictions want to have a planning area because they'd like to annex it to preserve it as open space. And LAFCO has approved essentially annexations for permanent open space. But if you look at these areas, again, a lot of them are on some category of agricultural or grazing land. And in terms of annexations, LAFCO considers but is not bound by the urban limit line or urban growth boundary. And whereas essentially for return to source purposes, the authority is. However, since the urban limit line went in place, we've received very few applications for annexations outside the line. So it clearly had an effect. And with that, I'm done and happy to take questions and try to get a sense of how the authority would like to work with us as we proceed.
Questions, comments for Don? Newell.
John, that's actually a great presentation. Your very first graphic of Contra Costa County, I'd love to get a copy of that image to see that three-dimensional geography is awesome. When we
thank the county for the maps.
Yeah, great. Thank you, county. But to your question, I'm going to go back 12 years ago when we were going through Measure C. We call it Measure C reauthorization in those days. I chaired the Southwest area on urban limit line. And my dear friend, Supervisor Glover, and I sparred it a few times about he represented the county and I was the voice for the cities. And then all of a sudden we had two cities that spun off and said, well, we don't want to go along with that. But the fact is that's the law of the land. The issue that I see, I mean, I support this 100%, but we're a transportation organization. And so my concern is we had some of my dear friends in the environmental world that I work with very closely. Here, we need to step up, add these things. And I think the problem of doing that is we have a fairly narrow focus. We found a way to get land use planning and transportation tied together. My question to this is, why can't we get LAFCO to go through the process to acknowledge and accept the urban limit line? Because if they can accept this, and they're going to consider that, then why aren't we going back to one of our tenants? We know that the urban limit line will protect a lot of those areas, not all of them. So that's number one. So without that, it's like we're saying, well, we didn't get that settled, so we're gonna go around and make an end run and try to do this. And it's altruistic, and I support it 110%. But I really think we should not lose sight, because
we should not what?
We should not lose sight that the urban limit line is our strongest tool. And what it said was there is enough space demonstrated by all of our general plans to build for decades, 20, 30, 40 years, that we should stick to that. And anything we can do to reinforce that issue. So if LAFCO still says, well, we look at it, but we don't see it as legally binding, I would still say, if you're going to do this, then we ought to be working on that too. They ought to go hand in hand, because one without the other is we're making a bunch of islands, and you end up like Walnut Creek, where Walnut Creek has multiple jurisdictions. It's got islands and stuff, and it's not. Michael Cass was here earlier. Well, I live in Walnut Creek. He lives in one of those islands. I think we ought to stick to our focus, and I think this is great. But I still think our basic language that's in our guidance factor, and this is not, For growth management, we tied that together, and we ought to stay there. And anything we can do to reinforce this, so if you can find the angle and the way that it will do this, but not having LAFCO recognize from a legal perspective, as we all do as cities, the urban limit line, then you know what? This isn't forward motion to me.
So let me say, maybe I wasn't clear. LAFCO recognizes the urban limit line. We understand it was approved by the voters, and it is a factor that we consider, and we consider it very important.
Right.
All I'm saying is we are governed by state legislation. The state legislation doesn't have the concept of an urban limit line because we're one of the few counties that does. So we cannot say that we are bound by the urban limit line.
Right. So
But
what
we
I'm saying
consider
is, I'm still going to say, I'll be real clear. We need to work on making that because it wasn't at the time LAFCO was formed. They didn't acknowledge those. We're not working on the fact of getting a state law. We have 2 new legislators in this area that this is a great topic for them to work on, to have it so that LAFCO can legally do that. It's the only way we're going to make that happen. That is a wonderful idea, but there's no teeth to it, and there never will be, because you won't be able to look at that any more than you look at, or sort of look at the urban limit line. And so to me, if you want to preserve lands and open space, the urban limit line does that, but we don't have all of that. So if we're going to go for this, I don't think that aligns specifically with a transportation organization. As altruistic it is, that's one point. Point number 2, I still want us to advocate, and all the cities should be advocating, and the county, that the urban limit line should be recognized, and we need legislation to tweak that so that LAFCO can say, yep, I recognize that. Then we should be doing that. Because otherwise, I think, as good as this is, it's not going to get us anywhere. Personal opinion.
Yeah, Federal? Turn on your mic.
I think one of the things we'll have an opportunity to do next year on the 5-year review is to look at some of those things that we have missed in the past and to, bring those into compliance, whether it's legislation or whether it's something that comes about from the county itself. So I would hope that you hold on to that thought, and certainly that be a part of the review that we look at next year, along with a number of other things, because we've been very fortunate that most cities has not tried to do anything in terms of moving the urban limit line, and they've waited on the 5-year review, although we have had a mechanism in there where under 30 acres that they have the ability to go back and to make their case to the Board of Supervisors with 4/5 vote, able to move those annexations in. But I appreciate your comments, and I think that's a good, at the 5-year review would be a good time to really have that discussion.
Okay, other comments, Bob?
Yeah, I guess LAFCO to me has had strange concepts for, we're way out in East Contra Costa County, and obviously Brentwood is growing, and we definitely need corn space because that's providing a lot of stuff for us. But could you tell me what your mission, you have a mission statement, LAFCO is doing this for what reasons, and then I'll go on, and then you can fill me in.
Okay. So,
and then I really need the tight concept of transportation going through LAFCO. Or LAFCO going through transportation.
Right. Okay, so starting with the mission. So part of LAFCO's mission, which is written into state law, is to preserve agricultural and open space while permitting orderly development.
And you work for the county?
The county has 2 members on the LAFCO board. We are an independent agency. So our membership is 2 people appointed by the Mayor's Conference, 2 from the Board of Supervisors, 2 from the Special Districts Association, and then the 6 of us get together and appoint 1 public member, who currently is a Brentwood resident.
Yes. Okay. All right. So what do you want to do? What do you want to get accomplished? Is it the 5-year plan that Glover is?
You mean for this? Well, I think right now, LAFCO hasn't even decided if we want an agricultural and open space policy. We don't have to have one.
Oh, okay.
So what we're trying to do today is to get a sense of how would you like to be kept informed? How would you like to influence what we do? And as LAFCO thinks about if they want to have a policy at all, what type it is, then we'll come back and present that and get feedback.
And then the final, again, how do we get transportation out of it, or how do we get them in it? And do they want to be in it or out of it?
So
I'm saying like CCTA.
Right.
You know, do they, when we go out for expansion, are they at the table?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
Okay. We have to have the transportation if we're going to move people in and move people out.
Right.
Okay. In order to do that, we have to have the right mechanisms to make that happen.
Right.
Well, we're either going to go through state agencies, county agencies, the agencies we have now, and I'm trying to figure out, will LAFCO, and maybe Glover, will work with the transportation agencies on a county transportation plan?
Well, I think it's not our scope. We would work with the agencies if we were asked to, or if essentially if you changed the table and Julie came and presented to LAFCO and said, we'd like LAFCO's input on the county transportation plan, we would provide LAFCO input the same way we're asking for it in this case. We are not a transportation planning agency. We're not a land use planning agency. So, for example, if a jurisdiction, Danville wanted to annex land, or if any jurisdiction wanted to annex land, one of the things we would ask for in the application is that they demonstrate that there are adequate services to accommodate what would go on in the annexation and that they pre-zone the annexed area. But it's up to the applicant to demonstrate that, not LAFCO.
So basically, it has nothing to do with us. They're just coming to us because we serve the same territory.
Right.
And if I could, let me be clear that part of the reason that the whole urban limit line issue came up was, of course, East County was a big reason for it, and all the traffic that was created because of all the housing that was done. And the idea wasn't to stop growth, but it was to say, let's build the infrastructure to accommodate that growth. And there was a couple of cities that decided that that wasn't the direction to go, and they took it to their voters themselves. And those are still, they have their own urban limit line. Well, actually, there's 3. It's San Ramon, Pittsburgh, and Antioch. Mm-hmm. So, traffic itself and this authority was a part of that infrastructure that was talked about preserving so that we can be able to move people in and out.
I was just going to add, Julie, to just what Glover was saying, but I think Dawn clarified it in what you're asking us and your conversation with Bob. I think from my seat as sitting on transportation is keep us informed for any area that's within the urban limit line, because that's within what we're looking at. If it's outside the urban limit line, then our jurisdiction is kind of stopped because we set our goals and our parameters. Said we're working it inside because we're going to solve the problem for the infrastructure. So, I mean, that might be a simple way to look at it, that we ought to know that those areas that you're looking at preserving open space that we collectively have acknowledged that are within the urban limit line, if it's in the general plan, then we have to pay attention to that, because we may need to comment and say, with all due respect, we may have a project that was there that's voter approved. Of course, I'm talking to you, you're on our commission, but the fact is to LAFCO as a whole, we ought to know what that interface is. But if it really is outside the urban limit line, you know what? Go for it. But inside that, we ought to, and the outside, I think, just to keep us within our confines and within our transportation parameters, which do include some land use planning. That's a simple way to say
Thank you, Newell. We now all of a sudden have a list of 5. So we're going to go to Chris Peoples first, and then Dave Hudson, then Gail, then Amy, then Kevin.
There we go. You sort of touched on this, but this is probably going to show my profound ignorance of LAFCO more than anything else. What's the relationship of LAFCO and annexation and land use? You sort of touched on it when you said that you could condition an annexation on certain kinds of zoning. But earlier you had said a city might want to annex something outside the urban limit line, but to annex it as a park or as open space. So how do you relate to land use?
So we don't do land use planning per se, but if a jurisdiction wants to annex land, we have an application process. You have to provide things as part of the application process. One of the things that the jurisdiction that wants to make the annexation has to do is to have pre-zoned the area they want to annex. LAFCO doesn't comment on the land use or the zoning that they come up with. They just require that it exists. Similarly, LAFCO requires that there be a tax sharing agreement between the jurisdiction and the county. LAFCO has no role at all in what that tax sharing agreement might be. We just say before we can approve an annexation, you have to have one.
Okay. Dave Hudson, then Gail.
Yeah, this may be through the chair to Newell. I want to make sure I understood this, that we shouldn't be involved with, I don't know if you said projects outside the urban limit line or, okay, because, all right, the point I'm trying to make is we, in this case, are involved with, I don't know if you call it development, but a road that's outside the urban limit line between us, and you're not advocating that, okay.
Just the land use aspect since it's outside.
Okay, Gail, then Amy, then Kevin.
You asked for input, and that's what I think we should be giving, is just input. I don't see a role, it's not in our scope to be doing this, to be interfacing more than giving you input, but I definitely think it's in our scope to be concerned about it, because we're also charged with looking at priority development areas, and that definitely affects whether things are going to slurb outside of the urban limit lines or so forth. So I think that I would definitely encourage LAFCO to go forward and do this. It can only complement the urban limit line interests. And having 2 ways of controlling how things sprawl is a good thing. So I'm in favor of you going forward and doing that and just keeping us informed when it seems important.
Thanks, Gail. Amy?
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, Don, thank you for this presentation. And I kind of wanted to follow up on that. I think it would be really helpful for us to have these detailed maps that really focus on, I guess, several things. First of all, where the preservation areas are, and I'm also mindful, we focus on the urban limit line a lot, but we also have the Briones Hills Agricultural Preservation Agreement, which provides, significant protections for the area in the central and west part of the county. And again, with the absolute intent of preserving agriculture there. So, and then I guess it would be helpful to see how this also fits with, for example, the Williamson Act. There may be tools in Contra Costa County that we can incorporate to preserve some of these additional lands that go beyond the capabilities of public agencies relative to funding that might be available. And the other thing, I guess, the question for LAFCO is one of the, in your statistics about, then and now in terms of the economics of our agriculture, how much that's changed. Will you at all be looking at potential policies relative to promoting agriculture, the agricultural economy? And I guess I know that the county has addressed some of these historically in making it more feasible, for example, to do grape growing for wines, and then the incorporating the retail elements of it, to be able to promote that kind of economy. Will you be looking at all with some of those policies? I know that spreads a little bit farther, but again, making those areas economically prosperous is just probably as helpful as preserving them.
So taking those 3 points in order, we have a large number of maps of different parts of the county prepared by county staff that show areas that are highly unlikely to be annexed or ever to move away from open space. Mount Diablo State Park, for example, Briones, East Bay Regional Park District land, so we can provide those. There are some Williamson Act lands in the county. It's over time a declining amount, in part because the state no longer reimburses the county for the tax losses from Williamson Act. So there's less incentive for the county to allow those to stay. In terms of being an agricultural promotion agency, no, not one of the things we do. There are farmland bureaus and things like that. The county has an agricultural commissioner that really falls more under his jurisdiction.
Kevin?
Coming from a community that is reacting now after the cow's already out of the barn, so to speak, and trying to develop some sort of ag mitigation program, I'd recommend you do it now rather than later, because it's a whole lot easier to do it now than saying, oh, gee, wish we would have done this before. And then I think you should advise us of all annexations, regardless of whether they're within the limit line, urban limit line, or on the other side of the urban limit line. Eventually, those parcels are going to develop, and we need to know. I think it'd be a good idea that we know what's coming our way, what's going to be developed, what may be added to us, and what kind of impact that may have on us and the decisions we make in the future.
Okay, we can do that. And I did want to throw a kudo to Brentwood. Of the cities in Contra Costa County, Brentwood is the only one that actually has an agricultural preservation policy. And Bob will know the numbers better than I do, but if the city annexes agricultural land, they require the applicant to conserve some amount of agricultural land elsewhere in the county through a fee, and they work closely with the Brentwood Agricultural Land Trust to do that.
Yeah, we set that up. It's been I don't have the exact amount of monies, but we built quite a nest egg. Now we've handed out pretty much the nest egg that we had built up that will preserve for perpetuity ground in and around Brentwood itself. And so we'll always have that flavor of the good earth around us, no matter what happens within. But we've done a good job on that. And at first it hurt people. They do want to contribute, but in order to get the mission accomplished, they did. And now it's come back 20-fold because it has preserved a tremendous amount of farm ground.
Thank you all. Good discussion. I do have one public comment. Oh, okay.
Well, it's in response to Commissioner Romick. I represent areas that are islands. They're already developed. I'm trying to figure out what the reasoning. I don't want another layer of review, and that being this agency for annexations.
Just advise us. We don't have to review. It could be something that everyone's aware of. Staff looks at and says, it's developed. Okay, we move on. But if I'd rather be the one picking and choosing what it is we want to look at rather than some other organization saying,
But Kevin, I'm not
I'll give
quite
you this,
sure.
and we'll give you that.
Okay, there's an area, let's just say, that's within the urban limit line. It's within a city sphere of influence. They want to annex it. What role? I don't see what this
We
agency.
have none.
No.
If
so
it's inside the urban limit line, I don't think that's what Kevin was asking
Are you
for.
talking about outside the urban limit line
He
then?
was asking for
I'm sorry, I
knowledge
misunderstood.
and just letting us know if applications were being made or granted so that we have an idea about that, because we actually do have rules about that.
We do, but I guess, and I respect what Gail's saying. My quandary over this, because we discussed this at the Planning Commission, is why would a city incorporate an area outside the urban limit line because they can't get their return to source funds from it? So
Because they might think they make more money from that development than they would from their return to source. And that I've been told that very specifically by two cities.
that's interesting, because I thought the purpose of the urban limit line was to prohibit anyone from developing.
It's to discourage. You can't prohibit.
Our public
but
thinks
you
it's
can-
to prohibit.
Well, it hasn't happened yet, so.
Well, that's my point. It's sort of moot.
You know,
All right, thank you for the
10 plus
clarification.
years, it hasn't happened, so it's discouraged well. Okay, we do have a public speaker.
Just
Okay.
I know. One more over there too. I think Dave wanted to go, and then I just had one quick comment.
Okay.
I-
Dave?
One of the questions that I brought up to Luann and Don is something we haven't discussed tonight, and that is in my city or outside my city, outside my urban growth boundary, inside the county's urban growth boundary is a property sitting out in the land of make-believe. We are not contiguous to it, but with what East Bay Regional Park District is doing now with Wiedemann's property, if we were to come to an agreement to annex both, that we not be sideways with CCTA, because it's not in our urban growth boundary, the municipal urban growth boundary, but it is within the counties. So I asked her to research it, which would fall under what you were just discussing.
Okay, thank you. No?
And just a quick one, Don. Nobody commented on open space, because that's the other thing you're looking at. Some of us have open space requirements. So, for example, in Danville, we're 26 square miles. Our requirement is 40% open space. So Danville has 40% open space. Of all the remaining property that has development rights, 2 have just come forward. One's just built. It was 500-acre parcel. 488 acres went to permanent open space. 12 were built on. A 400-acre parcel got 22 acres to build on, 388 acres. So if you want to look at open space, because that map would look a lot different when you start to add those. I know that's not open space on that one. But I would just say nothing to do with us, but you ought to look at it, because the open space determines a lot. What we look at is in the potential. So we've had 320 people of increased population since 2000. Our neighbors were doing that a week. So, you know, some of us we're done. We're built out. So looking at the open space, you look at Orinda, Lafayette, a lot of our communities, Clayton has a tremendous amount of permanent open space.
Thank you. David Current.
David is a
Thank you,
former
Chair.
public member of LAFCO.
I was just going to say that.
Yes, exactly. Weigh in.
Yes, I'd like to address the authority and the and Chairman Pierce, or Chairperson Pierce. As Don alluded to, I actually have been on both sides. I served on LAFCO for 9 years, 4 years as the alternate public member and 5 years as the public member. And I've also served 18 years on the Citizens Advisory Committee of the authority. The urban limit line has been a special interest to me because I've been in the middle of it. And first of all, Don, I've always believed that LAFCO has more authority than that you have used in approving the urban limit, or say upholding the urban limit line, because Cortese Knox Hertzberg clearly states that there must be a meeting of minds between the counties and the cities for any sphere of influence expansion, and that the LAFCO must give heavy weight to that agreement. And certainly the Measure J with the urban limit line is a very strong force, as you had mentioned. So I think that if LAFCO were to take a little bit more heed on enforcing that section of the law by saying, hey, we're going to give great weight to the urban limit line and discourage any annexation requests and make that real clear to cities, I think that would go a long way for preserving the urban limit line. Now, as far as the authority goes, as we all have discussed, Measure J does require each jurisdiction to have a urban limit line, a voter-approved urban limit line. They had a choice, so when measured in 2006, of either accepting the county or having a separate election. And as Julie has stated, that there is some weaknesses in it. It only encourages the recognition of the line, but it doesn't enforce it. But I think there are some stronger things that could be done. One of the problems is that what we looked at in the CAC when I worked with Martin about what happens with the voter-approved urban limit line. Well, what does the urban limit line mean? It's just part of the general plan, and there really isn't any definition of what it means as far, and I came up with the idea, well, the way cities zoned the land inside the urban limit line and outside the urban line kind of defines what the urban line is, and we included in the checklist a change, a requirement that if cities make any general plan changes outside the urban limit line, which would include the annexation request, that they have to report that, and the authority would evaluate as to whether that actually is a violation of the urban limit line. Because, let's say you have I think a good example of this could be the new town project of the county, where they were thinking about having, I don't know how that project's going, but where they're thinking about having something which looked like an urban development outside the urban limit line, and if they had a rezone to do that, that could be sort of like a heads up that, hey, that's a violation of the urban limit line. But something else that's a conflict is that some cities have expanded their urban limit line, and I don't know if this is the case, because quite honestly I didn't really look into it that much, but I know some cities expanded their urban limit line outside of their city limits, and that creates may create a conflict between where the county's urban limit line is and where the city's urban limit line is. And I think that's something that, when we're looking at the new expenditure plan, that the authorities should probably look into, is to say, how can we really tighten the conflicts between the counties and the city's urban limit lines, both as far as the zoning goes, which we've kind of addressed, but also whether there's a conflict between the city and the county's urban limit line. So I think that's the way it meshes. And I think also the question was asked, well, how does this deal with how does this deal with transportation? Well, it doesn't really deal with transportation per se, but it does deal with Measure J, and that's why the authority does have an interest in participating with LAFCO to develop a good open space agricultural plan. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I don't know that you really need action. I think you've had a good bit of feedback on this issue. Clearly, it's not one that really is on our bailiwick, other than the enforcement of our rules in Measure J and whether they go forward in the next issue, and that will be a wholly separate discussion from the agricultural open space. Thank you, Don. We appreciate
and thank you, and I would encourage you all to find an opportunity to sit on this side of the table.
All right, come back here where you belong. All right, thank you very much. Were there any other public comments on this item before I close this out? I don't see anyone jumping up. So, Martin, you're up. Our next item is the update on the status of the 2014 Countywide Transportation Plan. And I will be asking for public comment on this after Martin finishes his presentation. So if you want to fill out a speaker card and get it to me, that would be good.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Boy, this seat is really hot. I don't know if that was Don or Ross.
He better not be going to read all that.
I have my iPad here, but I also
I know.
I also brought the draft countywide plan,
Yep,
just so
exactly.
you could remember what it looks like on paper. And that's what this item is about, is to talk about a revised outline for the plan, and also some new information we'd like to share with you on our proposed modeling approach for the draft subsequent environmental impact report, which we are working on already. If you'll recall, the last plan, when we went to the proposal for adoption in March 2015, it was a three-volume set, and volume one was the vision, goals, and strategies, a look at the future, and some implementation plans, and volume two was all the action plans. Volume three was our long list of projects, our so-called Comprehensive Transportation Project List, or CTPL. And we received a lot of public comments saying you really need to rethink this and set your priorities, and I think we're well down that path now with development of transportation investment options and a possible transportation expenditure plan. So we're planning on reorganizing this document, and we've changed the outline considerably. We've restructured it. We've attempted to streamline it, and we are now going to incorporate the transportation investment options, which weren't in here before. And this will all be done under the new MTC guidelines. So in the Planning Committee packet was the revised outline, and the Planning Committee reviewed that, and they approved it. It is streamlined. Volume 1 of the plan will have an introduction, a discussion of challenges and opportunities. It'll still include the vision, goals, and strategies. And then it will have something new, an investment plan, and talk about these investment options. And then the final chapter of Volume 1 will be the implementation program. What is it that we're going to do to implement all of the strategies that we've listed? So previously, Volume 1 had a lot about the transportation system. We're moving that all out into Volume 2 now, and Volume 2 will be the transportation system and those 5 action plans that the regional committees worked so hard on, and they're still in draft form, waiting to be adopted by you, hopefully in May of 2016. Volume 3 was formerly the CTPL, and we're actually dropping that from the plan now. It will not be in print. It's going to be a living database that will live out on the cloud. Anybody can look at it and access it whenever they want to, and they can get a print copy if they request. But Volume 3 is going to be all new. It'll be analysis of the performance of the options using MTC's performance targets, and it will also include something new, an equity analysis, to figure out what the impacts of the various alternatives are on communities of concern and areas with higher levels of low income and minority groups than some of the other areas. We mentioned earlier about what are the different scenarios in the plan. So the subsequent EIR is going to actually have 7 of them, and we're going to analyze all of these using our countywide model. It takes a long time to turn the crank on the model, so we're really asking, for your approval tonight on all of these assumptions, and then out comes a draft EIR in January. But it's very hard to go back and change things once we've started turning the crank. So scenario 1 is the 2013 existing conditions. Scenario 2, now we all go out to 2040, is what we call the no build, and it's about half of the regional transportation plan, everything that's committed, funded, and has a completed EIR. Scenario 3 is the 2013 RTP that MTC approved. It includes the Sustainable Community Strategy. By virtue of our including that into this plan, we believe that we have achieved the goals of AB 32 and SB 375 because the RTP did it, and we're reflecting that Sustainable Community Strategy in our plan. Then we move on to new investments. So we have, as you've seen earlier, transportation investments A, B, and C, and those investments will total $10.3 billion each. And that's a combination of RTP money and leveraged Measure J new revenues, assuming a 2-to-1 leveraging. And then, so that's 4, 5, and 6. Now, number 7 will be this draft transportation expenditure plan that we're expecting you to look at and approve in November. And we have got the whole schedule set up so that the consultant will have some free board in November, and they can crank really fast on doing all the analysis for the draft TEP as they did for A, B, and C and the other options, and have that all ready for you to release in January of 2016. So that's the outline of the revised draft. The proposed modeling approach, we've had some requests from advocacy groups and members of the public to get this out there so that they could see what kind of inputs we're assuming for the model. We've tried to share as much of this as we can with EPAC, already showing them which way the needle moves on these various options in terms of system-wide measures. And I just want to remind the board we're not doing a project EIR on individual projects in this plan. We're doing a programmatic EIR, a broad overview. How do these different transportation investment options affect things like vehicle miles traveled per capita, vehicle hours traveled per capita, overall vehicle delay, overall speeds, modal split, how many transit riders are there for the whole county? That's kind of the level of analysis that we're talking about. And the modeling approach is in your packet, and it was reviewed by a technical modeling working group, which is a subcommittee of your technical coordinating committee. And then the technical coordinating committee saw these assumptions, these modeling assumptions, on October 15th and approved them and forwarded them to you. They are probably too technical and detailed for me to go into tonight. You're welcome to read them. And if anybody wants to comment on them on that time, we need to hear tonight or forever hold your peace, because this is what we're going forward with the consultant effort. So if you look at your packet, we're asking that you approve the revised outline and the modeling approach, and we've just, by way of options, if you want to make any changes to the content of the outline, you're welcome to do it now. We also are coming up against an issue, and I've mentioned this in the options. This is called the 2014 Countywide Transportation Plan. You're going to adopt it in May of 2016. The legislation says we're supposed to update it every 5 years. I think in good faith we have made every good effort to do that. The last time we did this was 2009. We were originally headed for a 2014 adoption. We had the draft out. So if you want to rename it the 2016 Countywide Transportation Plan, you can give staff that direction tonight, and we will then release it as such, and it might look a little better in January 2016 to have that year on the cover. So that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Martin. Does anyone around this table have a problem with making it a 2016 Countywide Transportation Plan? Then, by unanimous vote of those present, that is acclaimed. So any other questions, Janet?
Yeah, I had a question about the modeling, and I don't know much of anything about the modeling. I mean, like how to do it or anything. But I'm curious how anyone can know how many transit riders there will be in some year that's way far out in the future, or that many anythings, actually. So how are those, how does the model come up with those numbers? Other than they were just stuck in there. I realize it's an answer, but that's not the one I'm looking for.
Well, they're definitely not just stuck in there. In fact, it's a very sophisticated algorithm developed by many Berkeley and MIT professors. I don't think any of them come from the University of Michigan. I think most of them have come from MIT and Stanford and UC Berkeley. But they have developed algorithms that essentially predict human behavior. And all humans are alike in that they want to maximize their utility. You have only so much time, you have only so much money, and you've got to get from point A to point B. How are you going to do it? And here are your choices. You can take the car, and it'll take this much time, cost that much money. You can take the bus, it'll take this much time, cost that much money. And even the factor of convenience and comfort is in there, but based more on empirical data than actual scientific formulas. But through these analytics, the model is able to predict transit ridership, and basically it says if it'll cost you less money and take less time to take the bus, more people will ride the bus. It's not everybody, but more people, and it kind of uses probabilities and percentages to come up with estimations, and it's a very sophisticated approach, and I think it's state of the art, and it's been out there for a while.
So I guess the kind of answer I was wondering about is, depending upon, it would seem to me that there's part of the answer to that ought to be that depending upon the decisions that are made by, among other things, local government in the kinds of projects that they put into their jurisdictions that enable people to, let's, for example, look at bike lanes, for example. If a city puts in 0 bike lanes, or if a city puts in a very large number of bike lanes, I would predict with my little model that would impact the number of people riding bikes. So I'm wondering how the real model takes all of that into account, because that's dependent upon the decision and the financing that can be obtained to implement that decision. Those are things that are not known. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
May I
go
answer,
ahead.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Martin.
So we've actually got that covered, Commissioner Abelson. And on page 4B6-9, we talk about programs supporting active transportation modes. When we get down to the finer levels of detail, like building a new sidewalk, building a new bike trail, that's kind of beyond the realm of this countywide. It's actually a 9-county Bay Area model that we're using. And so we have to do what's called an off-model adjustment. And that is described on page 4B6-9 of your packet. And based upon empirical evidence, we've seen that building bicycle projects does increase bicycle and pedestrian activity by certain percentages, and can reduce vehicle miles traveled. So we actually look at that. We take away a few of the vehicle trips, only the shorter ones, 5 miles or less, and then we rerun the entire model to see what the effect is on vehicle miles traveled, and eventually we'll be able to get to greenhouse gas emission reductions based upon construction of bicycle projects.
In other words, it's very, very sophisticated.
I guess I'm asking a different question. I'm thinking about, let's say I have my city hat on and we decide to do some projects. That has nothing to do with the Transportation Authority, probably, including financing. Probably we got our financing elsewhere, for example. So, and we built, let's say we built whatever it is, or we built roads. It could be any topic, really. And then how does this model know about that? It's like outside of, that's what I don't quite catch. So this would be if there were no other programs or projects in the
So
work-
Janet, are you
universe.
asking how the model would capture projects that are done independently
Yes.
in local jurisdictions?
Yes.
Well, we're not all that mysterious. We all pretty much know what's going on. So I would assume that we would be keeping track of some of that.
Martin, maybe answer the question a different way. A major interchange, how does that affect the model? So you build a $400 million interchange improvement versus what Commissioner Abelson is talking about is she builds another arterial with somebody else's money, a developer's money. That will have absolutely no impact. The model will not even detect that type of a roadway, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the answer to your question is there would be no impact whatsoever on the model. The model wouldn't even be affected by an arterial that you build using, it's not in the regional transportation plan, but you build it using somebody else's model. These models have a hard time picking up the impacts of a major interchange modification, let alone a local arterial in the middle of a subdivision.
So maybe the answer that I was trying to understand was if we build things that are outside of what were being considered by the various alternatives in this plan, that you've just told us about, that if it's within that world, then it will show it, but things that are outside of that world, it doesn't actually account for, and that's an adequate answer. That's just what I was trying to be sure I understood. Thank you.
Yeah, if it's not in the plan, it's not in the plan, but we do have a fairly comprehensive list of projects, all the ones that are funded, by state, federal agencies, regional, local, and those that include authority funding. We're not just looking at projects where the authority has a piece of the pie in terms of funding. Our bicycle plan covers all that stuff, and that's incorporated into this.
So what I was thinking about is the ones we don't, because this is a long time period. We don't know everything that's going to come up in that time period now. We don't. I have an answer in my mind to what my question was, and that's all I needed.
Okay. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
Tom?
On page 11, under the heading Equity Analysis, one of the bullet points reads, accessibility to jobs within a 30-minute trip by auto or a 45-minute trip by transit. Parenthesis, this is similar to the equity analysis metric of average travel time for commute trips used in MTC's Plan Bay Area, close parenthesis. I guess I'm just concerned that whatever modeling you do is really updated to current conditions. Just intuitively, my guess is that whatever travel times were used when the Plan Bay Area was adopted could very well have doubled by now. And, a 30-minute trip in many parts of the Inner Bay Area will get you about 10 or 15 miles. And, something like this isn't going to have much of an effect on rail transit, but it would have an effect on buses and anything that uses roadways. So I'm just concerned that whatever you do here actually reflects as best can be done current conditions and not conditions that are even a year or two old because they're really out of date.
Martin, is there?
If I could respond to that, Madam Chair. So the equity analysis is trying to look at people's way of life and to find out, whether somebody who has kind of a normal commute is adversely affected compared to somebody else. And in this case, it's communities of concern versus all the other areas of the county. So this 30 and 45 is not really an average trip time by any means. It's kind of people's travel budget, and we do have a lot of data indicating, boy, it'd be a pretty good life if you could get there in 30 minutes or less by car and 45 minutes or less by transit. And so we're just using that as a benchmark, and then we're going to compare communities of concern to
yeah. Well, the point is it going to be realistic? So, 2-3 years ago, a 30-minute trip might get you 30 miles. 25, 30 miles. Today, 30-minute trip might be, if you're going across the Richmond Sanderfield Bridge, it might be 5 miles. And that's a dramatic change. And if you're looking at how that affects somebody in a community of change, then it's important that you recognize current reality and not use figures that are, even a couple of years old. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Newell?
Morton, thank you for this statement. First of all, the idea of us trying to align using a modeling system similar to MTC, doing this, we're doing all of this changing, even though we did environmental work, to get it to align to help us support a potential new investment plan under a new measure. And I get that. The question and concern I have is, maybe not the same way Tom is, every model has a bias, right? MTC's model has a bias that works to support their goals. And I get it, we will align better than this, but I just want to make sure it's like any model, when you know the algorithms that are used, you can test those and know what that bias is. And the biases tell you kind of what Tom is, I think, hinting at. It tells you where the flaws are in that, because you can not game the system. I can influence any of those models by knowing what those are and do inputs. For example, that 30-minute, you might call it a baseline, but in some models, that's the sweet spot, and it says everything's perfect. A 35-minute time changes it so dramatically something doesn't work. So I just hope that when we do this, and I know our TAC has looked at this, is to do tests on this and really understand what those biases are. Because otherwise we're driving, it's like driving a car, you didn't read the manual, you think you're headed the same direction, but in fact the GPS is going to make you go a different direction because the priority of the GPS was shortest road, no freeways, on and on and on. So I just hope we get to a level of real understanding of what all those biases are, and that we share that with ourselves, so that we know as commissioners when we're making policy decisions based on that information. We said, well, here's what it says, knowing that the following biases are built in, and here's the way those things are plus and minus.
Thank you. Any other comments about this item? The Planning Committee did review and approve this and recommend it forward. And personally, I would just say the revised ordering of the report, I think, makes a whole lot more sense. I think it's going to be a better, stronger report with the reorganization and give us the compliance that we need going forward for our countywide transportation plan. I heard before the meeting that I should expect there would be public comment on this item, but I have no speaker cards. Is there anyone who wishes to comment on this item? Hearing no one come forward, I will.
Second with the change to 2016.
Motion by Taylor, you agree with the change to 2016. Second by Hudson. All in favor of the item say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We are on to correspondence and communications. You have some items in your packet, several letters. There is a reminder, the Pittsburgh Center BART Station Milestone Event invitation is attached, and that's coming up shortly in November. And then we go to the associated committee reports, which are also in your packet. Commissioner and staff comments. I have no chair's comments, other than I guess I should report that since the last meeting, we did go to, it was since the last meeting. I'm losing track of days. Yes, since the last meeting, we went to Boston, and I'm going to let Randy report on the outcome of that. I actually should let Randy Carlton, but I think he just, oh, there he is. Let him report on that. It was a very successful trip, and you will all be pleased. But we had great timing because we missed the big storms and the deluge that came in the day after we left. So that was really good, and I will let them finish that. Any commissioner reports?
Yes.
Okay, executive
Yes,
staff.
yes,
Randy,
yes.
you want to? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry, Gail.
I just wanted to tell you, because your constituents will like this, that across the street, Avalon Bay is the developer of the Pleasant Hill BART Station project, and they have the big piece of property that is right across from here, where a future hotel, a future conference center, future offices is to be built, but it's empty now, and it's been empty for a long time. They are now going to allow midday parking there, and so any of you who have to go to San Francisco in the middle of the day, you can go there.
I don't
on a
have to
limit.
park
I
here
didn't finish.
instead.
I didn't finish. Yes, until they need that for a laydown to build the condominiums on the other side of the BART station. So it'll probably be at least a year that will be available.
Very cool.
So when everybody complains that they can't find a parking place, Avalon Bay is going to provide that for us. Not BART, Avalon Bay.
Wonderful.
But I might add, they're providing the space, but you pay to park there. It's not free.
Oh, right.
Well,
And
no,
it'll-
but when you said provided by, I want to make sure the
Yeah.
public knows.
Oh,
that
I
it's
didn't think
free.
anybody knew that
There's no
parking
more
was
free
free
parking.
anymore.
No, I know. But their ticket will very much indicate that it's temporary parking.
That's
Yes,
right.
and it'll be more than BART parking, because it's
Exactly.
private parking.
All right, Randy?
I have a 30-minute executive director's report. I want to
Go for it.
We had a very successful bond sale. So we went to Boston. We entertained about 10 firms. They were interested in our latest status upgrade, and they asked a lot of questions. They asked questions about why we weren't rated by Moody's, and I think Randy did a great job of answering all their questions. They were concerned about the increase in bid prices, and we haven't seen that on a drastic scale like we did in the past. We are a partnering agency. We did have 9 bidders on the San Pablo Dam Road interchange. We are getting close to having a recommendation on awarding that contractor. It seems like every bid or project we've AAA'd so far, we've had a bidder's protest, so it's a lot like I still work at Caltrans from that perspective. We're going through all this analysis. Ivan's doing a great job in analyzing with Chris and others to make sure that we bring the best possible outcome to you for approval. So we went out to Wall Street. This is the new money deal. We added $100 million. We added about $67 million of refinancing. And within 14 minutes, Randy had enough orders to cover the $167 million. And 90 minutes later, we had 6 times the amount. So they cut the orders off and began negotiating price. The final interest rate was 2.62. I think our last one was 2.11. But it's the lowest. Once again, we caught it right at the dip in the current rates, so there couldn't have been a better time. Fortunately, we did better than BART on BART because we have to benchmark against everybody, so we did better. We saved about almost a little over $5 million in debt service savings in that bond sale. And thank you, Randy. Randy deserves a lot of credit. And so the remarketing of the $200 million of floating rate notes, we started down the path of going on from a public perspective of selling that. We pivoted midterm because we were told that a private placement would be more effective, and everything's in place now. We'll come back to you with the final details, and we're going to be saving, and Randy's going to have the numbers. And it's hard for me to explain exactly how much that is, but it's getting closer to $1 million because we were able to pivot, save some money, and we're going to get a longer-term deal. We're going to get a 5-year deal. So rather than have to do it, so you got 2/3 of the length of time going on beyond that, and so we're not going to have to do this for another 5 years. So that's great news. That's a very good term, and we're working the terms with a bank called State Street. So that's what I have, unless you have any questions of me. I did attend the CTC meeting today. We welcomed the California Transportation Commission to the East Bay. I talked a little bit about what we do. There was a question about the project there, the 3rd lane on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. I don't think it was explained properly. It sounded like it wasn't. There were just the details of opening the lane. There's more to it than that. We have to bring a layer retaining wall back, make sure we have sight distance, make sure that we analyze the queuing so that Contra Costans don't suffer because the backlog, the choke point now is moved into Contra Costa, and our residents suffer in the evening. So we got to make sure all that is taken care of, and that was not articulated at the dais by the people that were asking the question and answering the question. So we're going to call Bobby Alvarado. He's the one who raised the question. He's concerned about that, and so we'll close the loop with him. But I talked about autonomous vehicles. So anyway, it was well. I think it was well received by Commissioner Medaffer. I'm not sure about the rest of the commissioners. So thank you for your time.
You might want to talk about the outcome of your conference in Bordeaux.
Okay. So
didn't you sign a contract?
Yeah. So we went to Bordeaux, France, for the ITS World Congress. Thank you for supporting that. The conference itself, a lot of discussion about autonomous vehicle, connected vehicle, the future. How do we take advantage of this in our long-range plans? I mean, what is it going to do for air quality? What is it going to do for safety? And we were there for one reason is to learn about what's happening worldwide. But the second reason is we signed an exclusive deal with a company called Easy Mile. Easy Mile is a partnership between Robosoft and Ligier, is an automobile manufacturer. The guy has no debt. We met him. He's a young guy. And his family has owned this automobile manufacturing company. And so we have the next 6 these Easy 10 machines, and we're going to roll it out at Bishop Ranch. So it's shocking the community, saying, wow, where'd they come up with this? And Alex Marin has blessed this and put his money behind this, and he sees this as a golden opportunity for people to actually ride in next generation technology as an advocate for using technology in the future and making sure that we have the resources necessary, such as a measure extension, if you choose to go that way. He thinks that it'll be a great advantage for us to help pass a measure along that 680 corridor. So we have exclusive rights in the United States. We're going to take 2 of the EZ10s next year. We're going to start demonstrating them on the test facility, and if we have to still have a steering wheel, maybe we need pilot legislation to eliminate the need for a steering wheel and allow it to be demonstrated around Bishop Ranch. That's about a 600-acre facility, and it's a great opportunity to test this autonomous vehicle.
That's what Newell was talking about earlier, for those who might not have figured out what it was, but that's where that link comes in. And so Contra Costa is cutting edge. In your packet, you have the upcoming calendar for the next couple of months and the calendar of upcoming events. And unless there's something else for the good of the order, I want to adjourn tonight's meeting in memory of our good friend and colleague, Bill Shin, who passed away last Saturday. He was a Concord council member, a mayor, and served on this board in 2011, and he was one of the good guys. There was never a better council member. He had more integrity in his little finger than an awful lot of people do, and he was just really one of the good guys, a commander in the sheriff's department, and a really superb council member. He will be very missed. So anyway, we will adjourn in his memory. Thank you all.